Hello, and welcome to Tech with Briley. Today we're going to continue working on our open source large language model chat with retrieval augmented generation. What does that mean? Well, we're just building a chat interface to overlay any large language model, primarily looking at Anthropic Claude and OpenAI models. And the chat interface will proxy calls to the backend server without exposing any API credentials. And it lets us embed functionality into the chat, such as retrieval augmented generation, meaning that it can search documents that we've pulled from the internet or various sources and put those contents that are retrieved based on the user's input into a prompt that is sent into the large language model for improved results. I don't have a lot of empirical evidence that the results are improved. I haven't done any A/B testing, but I think it's pretty common knowledge that the better context you provide to large language models, the better result you'll get back. And so we're wanting to provide very specific context that might be originating from documents in an organizational knowledge base, like a company knowledge base, or historical literature. I've done an experiment here with some letters and journals that were published in the 1600s and got very good results out of the large language model based on very small inputs from the user. And we're also looking at how this can be useful in an educational setting, such as with textbooks, having augmented chat interface in like an online textbook. This tool is flexible. It can be used for any of these use cases, and it's a small prototype right now, but we do have some ambitions to take this and keep it open source and publish this or integrate this into a larger content management system. But first we need to know all the kind of moving parts. So we started with a graphical programming environment called Langflow, which is open source. And we built a lot of flows, and I'm still using Langflow to a certain extent in this project. You can check out Langflow here at langflow.org. It's a visual programming environment, and you can do a lot with Langflow. And we're now working into the Python. We're here on GitHub. So you can check out the source on GitHub. It's MIT licensed. Today we're going to be working on some project management tasks. I don't have any issues created. So there's a couple of AI tools I'd like to use in the development process. This isn't necessarily a tutorial stream. This is kind of a show my work stream, showing how I work, how I use these tools. We're using Anthropic Claude here to help us generate a lot of the code. We're going to be using what are called GitHub code spaces and their GitHub sort of autopilot. I'll take a look at that once we get some issues in the backlog to help generate some more code and get guidance or give guidance to a large language model. So let's create an issue. I think what we're going to need to do is improve test coverage. So we want to take some kind of principled engineering perspective or philosophy about quality and reliability, and apply this to this project. We want to have good architecture without getting too obsessed with that up front, but also making sure that the code we do write, we're confident is still working later on. So one quick change I'll make is just, we're going to take a look at the code. So we've got some classes that are models, a message and message role, and then we have some classes that are instantiated from other libraries, and we have this kind of a functional interface. We might look at that, but we want to have a test. So we're going to say add test coverage for get chat response with history. And we'll keep these issues really small. But what I want to do is, we're going to be using a large language model we're going to try using a large language model to help us write these tests. And the better prompt I can give the model, I think the better result we'll have. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to tell Claude a little bit about this initiative. We'll just list the file names. The LLM client, we're going to deprecate this. This is actually using Langflow. So we're going to kind of break the work down a little bit granularly, and we can work independently that way. And GitHub doesn't really have support for like kind of epics. So it's a little bit harder to organize bigger initiatives like these test coverage. But anyway, we'll have separate issues. And when I prompt Anthropic with multiple tasks or multiple questions, it's able to deliver on those. And it's a kind of a recommended practice, not just ask one question at a time. So we can see with the new capability of adding artifacts here, we've got now 4 artifacts, and they should be fairly consistent. Ooh, ensure tests are independent and can run in any order. That's kind of an interesting note. And we might add testcove alerting to this project at some point. Yeah, and so it's giving pretty good guidance. It knows the ChatGPT client is using a third-party library. That's going to make HTTP requests. So we're going to have to mock that. So yeah, it's got actually pretty meaningful results. So let's go ahead and start creating these here. And so I was initially starting with the function level, but this is, I think, a better approach. And I'll just point out it's using the correct header levels, which is nice. And we'll add this as an enhancement, good first issue, help wanted. This way people might pick it up. Submit that issue. PyTest parameterized tests are pretty nice. Django doesn't support those. I vaguely understand why. Let's see here. Oh, this is that bot. Yeah, you don't want to. What? On the host machine. I was running this as root, but okay. All right, maybe I can configure a different value. So the problem was I'm trying to deploy Langflow. We've done a lot of work with Langflow, and we would like to just use that and get it running. Okay, so somebody else is having this issue, and yeah, if it's just a matter of root permission or permissions on the host machine, a different directory would make sense. But it's hard to know generically when you're writing a Docker compose file, you know, what the layout of the host machine will be. You know, generally it's going to be Linux, most likely kind of Unix-based ones. Hence, they know it until it can var lib, but they don't know what user will be running that under. But I was just surprised that the general Docker compose file just doesn't work. That's kind of been my experience. With Langflow, there's just been some real weird gotchas. The project just came out of a 1.0 alpha, and they've made the 1.0 release. So, of course, they were focused highly on this big refactor and making things stable. So, no worries there. I just can't really get it deployed. I'd like to get it deployed, but this might be the change. That might be all that we need to do right there. Or this one. Something like that. We'll get that. And then var lib Postgres data, so we might have a similar issue there. All right, I'll come back to this. This is good, though. If we can get it deployed, that'll save us a lot of effort. And I do have LLM code here. I should rename this to Langflow client. Where did it go? I'll just do that while I'm thinking of it. LLM client. Rename this. So yeah, this project, I've only been working on it for 2 days, probably about 6 to 8 hours in total. There's a lot of moving around I'm doing, trying to get it in good health though. So that's what I think it's a good time. We've got the basic working project. It's a good time now to take a step back, make some strategic plans. Test coverage is a great one to start with at this level, where it's sort of behaving how I want it to. So I can run tests now to make sure that that behavior remains intact. So let's continue with that. We'll add a new issue. And by the way, the reason I'm getting these descriptive prompts is not only to help myself or potentially other coders, but then we can open this in a GitHub Copilot workspace, and it can actually do some pretty cool stuff for us, planning it out and even writing the code. I've only used it once on a specific issue, so I'm learning how to use it, learning about its capabilities and the trade-offs between kind of coaching the model versus doing it yourself. You know, there's got to be some threshold where you just decide to do it yourself. It's like automation. You know, you do it yourself up to a certain point, and then after a certain point, it becomes good to automate. In other words, we're automating the writing of code, but there's also another variable in here that the more complex the task, I think the large language model doesn't have the context that a developer who's familiar with the project would have. So it's not just about time, it's about some other things like complexity and understanding. So here's our application running. We'll hop back over to Claude. We will continue creating these tasks. New issue. And But yeah, I'd like this project to be useful for other people, and I'm planning on deploying it for a community. So I want to make sure it's kind of behaving how I'm expecting it. Help wanted, good first issue enhancement. Now they do have milestones, which are kind of like epics, but they're too, well, they're just, I don't know how to say it, but the GitHub user experience is just kind of feels half-baked a lot of ways. And these milestones, for example, they tend to sort by the last time they were last updated or alphabetically or something, and you might want to sort them chronologically, or you might not even be running these on a particular time schedule, but there's, generally in milestones there's a sequence of those, and you want to control that sequence, not necessarily by a calendar dates though. Especially with open source, you don't really know when you'll deliver things. So yeah, just the milestones on GitHub are not really there. And GitHub projects, I had a lot of hope for, and they're improving that. So maybe we'll be using that soon. So let's go ahead and close these out, just so I have fewer things running. And there's some tasks I want to add that are more interesting than test coverage. So let's see if we can get to those today. I'll leave this in my notifications history, so I'll remember to come back to that. We want to add a task, for example, to add memory to the project. We're going to add a task for rate limiting. Just while I'm remembering that. We got rate limiting, token limiting, and I'll add the Y. What was the other one? Memory. persistent. All right, so there we are. Just while those refreshing my mind, I wanted to get those on into the chat, and we will continue then. Well, let's let it generate for a minute. I'll get a drink of water real quick and be right back. Okay, very cool. So I've got a little bit of additional ideas for how to make this more generalized and configurable so that people can deploy it and train or at least generate vectors based on their own documents. And it would be nice to be configurable via like JSON or some kind of text format and parameterized so that you could define multiple retrieval augmented generated chats based on knowledge bases, lists of documents, have a flow to ingest those, and then an endpoint to call those, to call a chat that is trained or accesses only those, and has, for example, a local ChromaDB collection. That would be the thing. We would have a single database. SQLite seems to be scalable. We'd have to see ChromaDB collections in each of those. In that, for each of those chat endpoints. I'll have to think about the structure, but okay, something like this. Let's just call it project ID. Whatever we use, something like that. Chat endpoint slug. list of knowledge source. It's a list of dictionaries. So I think that's it. So we'll need an internal project ID that may or may not be in the configuration. Endpoint slug, so that we can kind of initially set up this process, extract the documents, like split them, vectorize them, and then retrieve them in an endpoint, but not all of that. So the separation of concerns would be around the retrieval and the generation, the vectorization. And then knowledge sources. Keep chat memory. I don't want to get overly specific here, so let's just say something like bool there. But you could even say whether or not to keep the bot or the person, the assistant, the person. I want to think a little bit of a higher level. So we've got these knowledge sources. Oh yes, so then I need to say the collection. And I'm thinking that for short-term memory, we might just use like a Redis or some kind of in-memory thing that's a bit more volatile, but we could introduce, I think, and this is happening generally speaking, we can introduce concepts of mid-term memory and long-term memory, where we have different layers of memory that the chatbot is able to have. And in a way, this retrieval augmented generation is a form of long-term memory. For example, we're remembering documents that were written in the 1600s. That's really long-term memory. So the documentation is a form of long-term memory. I don't know what mid-term memory would be exactly, but it could just give us something in between Redis, volatile, in-memory data store. retrieval augmented generation collection. So the midterm memory could be for example, vectorizing the chat messages and retaining those for several months or something. Have to think about that. I want to use kind of simple language, but we need to ingest the documents. And we might make this configurable, the embedding model. Yeah, I think so. We just need to validate the configuration, ingest the documents. I think those are the main tasks that have come up in the process of creating this chat app. We need a way of getting the data into the system. And if we're going to have configuration, we'll have to validate the configuration. And I'm thinking in terms of a migration as well, because when I ingest all these, documents, I might be using an embedding model at that point. We might change the configuration to use a new embedding model, but the ingested documents would go out of sync in a way because we ingested them using the previous embedding model. And now our runtime lookup is going to look for the current configured embedding model and embed, like create sentence embeddings from the user input, which just won't perhaps match the document store. So we'll get strange results. So there would be the validate configuration could check for this. Likewise, the what do they call it? Collection name or the schema name? What do I call it here? Collection name. Construct messages, construct an input message from the or themselves. So I'm doing chat messages. System prompt. Chat history enabled. Retrieval results. So this is basically back to the way it's currently behaving. Developer. possibly revectorizing the documents. Creating a new collection. So yeah, I'll have a few SQLite databases. So the configuration database will have its own structure, and then the ChromaDB So yeah, and then I just want to use some ORM with migrations. So this is quite a lot. This is a big idea. I had to put a lot down, and probably missing a bunch of context, but something that just occurred to me. So let's go ahead and submit that. Yeah, I'm getting a bunch of messages. It's been about an hour or two, so I'm going to finish writing these up and then take a little bit of a break. And probably in the afternoon, I'll come back and work on a couple of these tasks. But you got to kind of every once in a while, step back and kind of plot the path a bit, as well as capture your ideas. And this is the key, because I have some use cases that I want to deploy this for, but those shouldn't really leak into this project. I realized that in my previous attempt, I've created very bespoke chat applications, and which is my goal. And so in pragmatic sense, I'm like working directly on my goal, but I can also make this work for your goals or other people's goals just by thinking a bit more generically. And I think declarative configuration and configuration as code is a very common pattern. And so with just a little bit of, I think just a little bit of change and introducing a couple of moving parts, this project could just take wings and be something you could deploy using a configuration file and a Docker container, and that can run in so many places. And we can create one-click installers that'll do that. For example, to DigitalOcean, and then you just log into the shell of DigitalOcean and you run some of these scripts that essentially look at your configuration. We might use YAML. It's not so bad. Terraform uses YAML. We use YAML at work quite extensively. I've just been reading a lot of conversations about some of the complexities and shortcomings of YAML and frustrations people have. But I'm in the camp that I believe we need a declarative configuration interface and not to intermingle too much procedural or imperative code with configuration, because that kind of obscures the desired state. You have to parse the code in your mind or parse it in a system to see the desired output. Although there are some intermediary solutions that will take your logic and code and render it to artifacts, that can be then reviewed and inspected. So that's an interesting solution. We're using one of those at work. That's an in-house solution. I think there's a few of those available for Terraform. The one that starts with P, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I think we'll take this configuration as code approach and just not use a generator, just make it simple and declarative. So we'll just create this issue. This is an interesting one. We probably won't prioritize this right away. This is why we're putting these in the backlog, so we'll remember them and circle back around to them when that's relevant. My goal this week is to just get this deployed as a demo. Configuration management. Parser for either, not both. And we'll need to validate it, and we'll have to store and retrieve it. SQLite with ORM. Ingesting documents, that's the key. I've had to use an out-of-band process and Langflow for that up until this point. And we might want to support different types of documents. This is a good point, document parsing. And I don't want to implement this from scratch. So use existing libraries. And again, this might be stuff that's already part of the Langflow ecosystem. I'm sure it is. We might include some of those components, but so far we've been a bit framework agnostic with this project, keeping it easy to understand, but in doing that, you invent your own framework. So I realize I'm making my own framework. I'm not, I think we have that illusion that if we're writing our own code, we're not using a framework, then that we're not using a framework, but actually we are writing our own framework. We can vectorize those and make sure we can upsert, because we don't want to have a bunch of garbage results. Multiple collections, yep. Metadata for more efficient retrieval, which will be interesting how that would be used. You'd have to have declarative configuration for that, probably. Yeah, I don't know how general purpose I can make this. I'll make it general purpose enough for our own use case. Dynamic retrieval, flexible message construction. Oh, interesting. I think, yeah, that's true. People will want to configure the prompt ordering, perhaps. Well, we're going to use SQL Alchemy probably, because it has my Alembic migrations. Admin interface, wow. This is where we're starting to get into Django territory. But we need asynchronous. Hey, Django has asynchronous views. This would be a nice feature, optional. Probably a separate issue. That's a bit of a big one, but this is just brainstorming. ORM, SQL Alchemy, async operations, yes. Logging, yeah, good point. Error handling, of course, good point. I had some of that in my my migrations when we were working on the Western Front project, not having proper error handling, not handling edge cases. It was a, natural growing pain. Celery for long-running applications like ingestion. Yeah. All right, I've got to respond to these. These are important messages. I'm going to go ahead and submit this, and I just want to finish what I've got from this conversation. So we got test coverage, but that was an important thought. I wanted to capture that one. That was it's a kind of epic, a large feature. RAG service, chat.py, and ChatGPT client. Where are we going here? Close that. All right, so the labels enhancement, good first issue. I don't know. Test coverage is not so exciting. Vectorstore.py. So if we go back to the issues, we've got ChatGPT client, chat.py, RAG service, and vectorstore.py. ChatGPT client, chat.py, RAG service, and vectorstore.py. Then we have rate limiting. This is a key feature enhancement. Again, we're just project management focused during this session. I think these are, relatively speaking, good issues, especially, and I'm sorry, I'm just copying and pasting this. I'll review them and clean them up later, but so far the issues have been pretty good. But if we have good mentorship and active discussion in community, it's really good to label these as first issue. People can try something that might be a bit challenging, but we can work together as a team. Available for pair programming, things like that. We're not going to probably optionally use a tokenizer. We use these, I think both the embedding models and the LLM generation responses include the token count. Yeah. We'll have to add some documentation. Proper chat memory. So yeah, another interesting feature. Again, LangFlow has support for all of these in the LangFlow framework, and it's been evolved for quite a long time, so certainly it's a good solution if you're just wanting to develop some applications. The problem is it's a bit complicated for me right now to understand it, and I have a very specific project, so I'm just focusing on the parts of the pipeline that are relevant to my project. Simplicity matters. All right, very cool. Well, we've got some issues in our backlog. Most of them are labeled token limiting, user interactions. I think, let's see if we just select multiple of these. That's not such a good first issue, but these are good first issues. Enhancement, good first issue, help one. Very cool. All right, well, this has been another session where we've been working on our FastAPI LLM chat with retrieval augmented generation. If you'd like to check out the code and use it for your own purposes, we're open source on GitHub. We do have some issues that are labeled good first issue that might be of interest to you if you'd like to contribute to an open source project. And I'm available if you have any questions or difficulties. Feel free to open up an issue for support or discussion. All right, thanks very much for your time. Have a great day.